Welcome to The One Inside, an internal family systems podcast. I'm your host, Tammy Sollenberger. I'm excited that you and all of your parts have taken time to be with me and all of my parts. If you are a coach, a client, a therapist, if you are in business or education, and you're curious about the IFS model, you are in the right place. Now, let's see what happens on today's podcast. Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. I know that it's tough. It's really tough right now, and I know a lot of people are struggling. And so before I introduce my guest, who I'm really excited about, I just wanted to touch base and see how everybody's doing. And I just want to acknowledge there's a lot of sadness and a lot of fear. And I read an article the other day about the biggest problem for most of us isn't the COVID-19 virus, it's the fear that we're having and how fear obviously weakens our immune systems. And so I was thinking about that and really trying to be with the parts of me that feel fear. I don't know about you guys, but I'm also noticing I'm not someone who typically runs anxious. And so what's happening right now is that I've been experiencing a lot of like chest tightness and a lot of like, I don't know if I can breathe. And this part of me that's worried about being able to breathe. And then that obviously makes me more anxious and more tight in my chest. And oh my gosh, then I have shallow breathing. And that's something that I'm really trying to just pay attention to. And one of the things that I don't know if this happened for you guys, but when I find out that other people are having some of the same experiences that I'm having, it actually feels so good because then I realize, oh, okay, this is just a symptom of what we're living in. And it's almost as if my parts feel like this joining or this rapport building or this connection. Maybe that's probably what it is, like this connection. And then I feel relief. And even as I'm talking, I can feel that tightness in my chest loosened up a bit. I had someone that I was working with talk about sadness and sort of feeling the sadness and starting. I live in New Hampshire, as you know, and I don't think it's really hit us yet. We only have 3 deaths so far, and we know that that's going to get worse. And so I was talking to one of my clients, and they were talking about this sadness and about a specific story that she was hearing, and we played with that for a little bit and really realized it was grief. And then a couple hours later, I talked to another client who told me, and this was a teenager, and then she was like, I've already worked through the stages of grief. And then she just started talking about it. And I was like, wow, this kid is already realizing that there are these levels of grief. And if the grief is about, you're not at school and so you're missing out on your senior year, or if your grief is about you've lost your job or you've lost your job as you know it, or the grief is someone that you love is sick or you're sick or someone you've loved has died. There is these levels of grief, and I know that Derek and I have talked about that a little bit, but I just want to acknowledge that. I think that's a lot of what I'm feeling is this fear and this grief. And so maybe just calling it that and acknowledging that with you as you're listening to this, that maybe we can just join together and connect. And I'm also giving my parts this, I'm just letting them feel that I understand them, and just letting them really unblending from them and letting them know that I'm here, that I am with them, that they are not alone, that my fear and my grief and my sadness and my terror, I think sometimes it feels like terror, that is not alone. And so I'm really just giving them understanding and validating them. And so just like we do, and you know this already, right? Just like we do for each other, like this, having this shared experience, and that feels really good as we're connecting over that, then I'm actually doing that for my parts and saying like, hey, I'm here, I hear you, I listen, I'm with you, and that you're not alone. I want to let you know a couple of things. One, is that if you go over to the Internal Family Systems page on YouTube, it's not super active, but there is an IFS page on YouTube, and they're starting to put up webinars. Dick did one last week. Tony is doing one. Well, by the time this airs, Tony will have done one. So hopefully both of those will be up on the YouTube channel. And of course, the Internal Family Systems on Facebook, it's up there too. So I wanted to let you know that there are resources, and I hope that you're using the resources. There's a part of me that feels overwhelmed by the resources, by like all these famous people reading books online and all these famous people going live. And I'm just like, holy cow, it's a little bit overwhelming. So just to throw one more at you. Okay, so today's session is with Mike Elkin. And I say that Mike Elkin is sort of famous. I think he's famous. He is a lead trainer for the Internal Family Systems Institute. And before meeting him, I had heard his name at other trainings that I had done, and at the level 2 training that I was a student at, the lead trainer kept quoting him, so much to the point that I was like, I need to take a training with him because she keeps quoting him so much. I was super excited. I met him at a couple of annual conferences, and then I had like a friend introduce me to him as more of like an official meeting. And then I was a program assistant for level 2. And that's where Mike and I officially met, and we hit it off. And I think that you'll hear that I just adore him, and he is all over the place. So if you've ever done a training with him, he even says that he likes to have like another trainer. And I think he needs another trainer to help guide and kind of coach him and to keep him on track, which I think you can tell. So this podcast is a little bit long. I think it's because we are all over the place. But the benefit of that is we get lots of cool content. I wrote a big note on my the show notes because I had a pen and paper as we were talking, and then again as I was editing this, because there's just so much good stuff. So I wrote down some of the things that really stick out to me, and I hope that you will listen through with a pen and paper if that's something that you like, and take notes. Mike and I don't talk about the coronavirus because we recorded this together on Valentine's Day, actually. So one more thing before I go, I'm not going to give you the list of all the things that we talk about because it's like I said, it's all over the place and it's a ton of stuff. So look at the show notes. One thing I did want to say, because of COVID-19, what has happened is IFS has put a lot, if not all, I'm not sure, their courses online. So you can take an online course. So I believe, and I put a link for it in the show notes, that you can actually take the depression, anxiety, and shame course, the level 2 course. You would have had to have level 1 IFS, but if you want to take that level 2 course that Mike and I talk about, I think you can take it online. So I put the link there. And of course, you would know that you would only be able to take it if it was being offered, which was only going to be offered in Massachusetts like once a year. And so now, because it's online, I think maybe you can sign up for it. Like, you'll have more access to these online courses, which I think is super cool. All of that obviously is brand new, but one of the gifts I think that we'll all, at the end of this crazy time we're living in, I think there'll be lots of gifts, and I think that is one of them. Is that there'll be more access for everyone for this IFS material. Okay, hope you guys are doing okay. Hang in there, and I'll talk to you soon. Enjoy this one.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Fabulous. And yourself?
I'm really good. So you live in Massachusetts. Do you live in Massachusetts?
Marblehead, Massachusetts.
Okay. And so if you look out a window, what do you see outside today? What does it look like out
Well,
there?
when I look outside out of the window, I just see, you know, what looks like a suburban street. But if the trees and the houses weren't there, I'm a quarter mile from the ocean.
That's right. I
Not
remember you
not
telling me
even
about
a
that.
quarter mile. About a quarter mile.
And you live on like a private, like I couldn't come to like where your ocean beach is, right? You have to know
Yeah,
someone
you
to
could.
come
You
there.
just have to pay a lot of money to park.
Okay.
But if you wanted to come, you could park at our place and walk down.
Yeah, I'm gonna do that.
Okay.
Yeah. There are a lot of special, fun beach places in New England, but they're like hidden. Like, there's public places that are packed, but then there's
Yeah.
We went up to Maine one time and ran like a 5K, and we were running along these amazing beaches, and there's no parking, and it's all for the residents of those towns.
Yeah.
And I was jealous.
Yeah, well, I'm not much of a beach person, but seriously, if you ever wanted to use our house as a parking lot to go to the Marblehead beaches, which are quite lovely, uh,
I seriously will do that. I will text you and I'll come down. I'll bring my son and we'll do a beach day.
fair enough.
I love it. So I thought we could talk. Is there anything that you want to talk about? Anything that's coming to mind?
Nothing immediately. In other words, Ann and I have another several of these things to do that you assisted at, but none of them are local. We're doing one in Chicago and one in Boulder and one in Lisbon.
So what Mike is talking about is there's a new level 2 that is called shame and depression.
Anxiety and depression.
Okay.
You
Okay.
used to call it anxiety, depression, and shame, but when they figured out the other was SAD, they couldn't resist. So they relabeled it.
Okay, good.
But it's basically, it's deepening. It's like a deepening and extending, but with a real emphasis on shame and its ubiquity and how it essentially generates all our work.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
shame is at the bottom of everything that you and I address.
Yeah. So talk about that. What does that mean? That idea that shame is at the bottom of everything?
Well, the thing is, whether it's a design flaw or not, no matter how you explain it, it's not hard for anybody to find parts that feel that if we were really seen and understood, we would be despised and rejected.
Hmm.
And that there's something fundamentally defective about us and that we're bad. And so shame is the experience of having that badness witnessed. And it's the most painful thing available to human experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because you didn't know me when this happened, but a very little while ago, about 2.5 years ago, I was an invalid. And I had to use a wheelchair in airports, and I couldn't walk more than maybe 100 yards, not even 100 yards, 100 feet. And I couldn't stand still for more than about 10 seconds.
Oh, wow.
And I read a book by a guy named John Sarno. And Sarno is a rehab doctor, and he said basically somewhat over 90% of all chronic pain is psychosomatic. And there's research that proves that there's no relationship, no scientific relationship between chronic back pain and spinal anomalies. And a bunch of radiologists were given stacks of MRIs and X-rays and asked to predict the level of functioning of the people whose pictures they were. And they did about as well as a fifth grade class would have done. There were people who they said, this person's in a wheelchair and they're climbing mountains. And then they would say, this person is active and healthy and they're in a wheelchair.
But so they were just looking at what was happening physically and
They were looking,
making.
they were
Okay.
looking at their,
Wow.
and
Wow.
to me, what that does is underline the fact that evolution has decided that physical pain is much less interfering than shame. And so we use physical pain to distract us from our shame. And my experience was when I stopped placating my daughter-in-law, who was the most difficult person in my life at the time. It was funny. I made that decision. I was talking to my sons, and I made the decision that I was wrong to sort of follow my hubris that as difficult as she was, I had enough skills and open-heartedness to deal with her effectively. And I realized I didn't, and I was being played. And then my son needed to go to the supermarket. He didn't have a car, so I drove him. And usually I would sit in the car because I can't walk around in the supermarket. but I did. I walked around for 45 minutes in the supermarket. Uh,
Just after
and
making that decision, like, I'm not gonna deal with her
yeah,
anymore.
I didn't have any sense of change except the pain changed, I would say 75%. And then when I discovered these magic pills, I essentially became an active, viable being again. Because a friend of mine developed these radical anti-inflammatory pills. I think I told you about that. Really,
Yeah. Well,
uh,
tell the listeners about it. Let's give her a plug because they're huge. They
yes.
change so much,
Uh,
and
the website is Be Better Now with Be Better and Now all capitalized.com. My friend's name is Pepe Wishno, and she's a genius. And her mother had advanced dementia, and she got interested in dementia. And she has a PhD in chemistry and then postdocs at MIT and Caltech. And she's one of these people who does everything really well that she does.
hmm.
Uh, and she decided that the bottom of most dementia is inflammation. And she found a way to alter the turmeric molecule so that it was easily absorbable and could pass the brain blood
Barrier. Yep.
barrier.
Yep.
And so I was part of her clinical trial, as was my wife. And I also have COPD, and I had the back issue.
Hmm.
And it improved both of them radically. Plus, I do have a much better memory. And,
Wow.
I do these trainings that are 6 weekend trainings. And there are 33 students and, say, 11 staff. And, I usually know some of the staff and none of the students. And after the first weekend, when I come back the second weekend, I used to remember about 5 names of the people, usually very attractive women. And so after I'd taken this pills for about actually 2 or 3 months, and I came to a second training and remembered the name of 17 of the students.
Wow.
Now, to be fair, I was trying to memorize names as opposed to just, but it was pretty damn significant for me. So
Right.
I'm like the guy who says it cured my uncle. I'll take 3 bottles.
Yeah.
I stop strangers on the street to give them the good news. So, uh,
So, go ahead.
yeah. Go.
That's great.
Anyway, so that's my plug for
I
Pepe.
love it. Yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad if something works, we want to share it. Well, back up. And did you start having the back issues when your daughter-in-law, like when that kind of got ramped
Yeah,
up a
I
little
did. The
bit?
onset was very mysterious, and everybody in my family had back pain but me.
Wow.
And usually the onset of back pain, like I think it's 6%, you get it. You start getting back pain in your 70s, and I was one of the 6%. I was probably when it started 75 or something.
So you were in your 70s and you're like, okay, well, everyone else has back pain, and you woke up and
I woke up and I had this very sharp pain in my hip that hurt with every step I took,
oh,
and it just it governed my life. I mean, if we went anywhere, my wife had to drop me off in front and then find a parking space, and I literally couldn't walk down to the corner store. There's a drugstore, I would say 100 yards from my house.
hmm,
There was no way I could get there. Uh,
wow.
and, I figured, okay, well, I am now an immobile old guy, but not
Hmm.
anymore.
Well, so that's incredible because I think that pain is something that changes. So it changes your life, right? It changes your
Yeah,
lifestyle. I can't even walk down, but also changes your mood and changes how
right.
you think about yourself. And I'm guessing
Yeah,
there's pain. So and then there's shame about the pain.
right. And also, I used to teach pain hypnosis at
Oh,
UMass Medical
wow.
Center.
Okay.
And I was good at it, and I tried to use it with this with almost no success. And I have a high tolerance for pain just naturally. and I have the skill set. So what it did not do was make me depressed,
Wow. Okay.
and it didn't. It just essentially was a barrier to doing what I did. I'm a billiard player, and the pool room is like my senior center, and it's where my boys are, and I hang out. And I kept playing billiards, but I would have to hold onto the table as I walked around. When I leaned down to make a shot, I was comfortable enough. But
Oh,
walking around the table was a real chore, but of course I did it.
yeah.
Uh,
Because you loved it so much.
yeah, and it fills, you know, empty hours, which otherwise I'd be using to write a book or do something constructive.
Well, that stinks for all of us who want you to write a book and write all your sayings down in a book for us all.
Yeah, I just got to think from. Do you know David Hoffman, the guy? He wrote the book on mediation, literally, and he was a lawyer of the year, and he invented collaborative divorce, and he took the level one, the one before this one we just started,
Okay.
and became he's a widow. He's a widow, and his wife was a student of mine,
Oh,
and
wow.
uh, so he went to a conference and heard me present a thing on fun. It was called "Fun with a Couple from Hell," and it was about working with high conflict couples. And I had a handout which was called "Opinions," which were my thoughts about couples and working with high conflict couples. And he just wrote me and asked me if he could edit it a little and use it as a handout in mediation classes.
Wow.
And it was a little flattering. And I am, in fact,
Yeah,
mentioned in the book. So
that's great.
I'm not just any asshole.
No, no, you're
I'm an
not. And
asshole
we all know
mentioned in the
that.
book.
So, you have all of these, like your own opinions and you have these protocols, but you also have these great sayings that you say, and I don't know why you haven't compiled them to a book.
Well, I think a large part of it is laziness, and the fact that a bunch of other people have compiled them, uh, and sometimes sent me. I think the word often is Mike-isms, but
Yeah.
uh, you see, I did write a book, and I wrote a book because I had the best editor in the world standing on my neck. Because through a series of, if you believe in coincidences, I am not a person who believes in, but I wound up having a contract with Norton to write a book, and I scored the editor uh, of the book that actually made me take myself seriously as a therapist, which was Strategies of Psychotherapy by Jay Haley. And she edited that book. And I read it probably 40 years ago, no, 50 years ago, maybe. And at the time, I was working as a therapist in a drug program. And I thought of myself mostly as an ex addict hustler who somehow had, scammed himself into this job and was talking to now current addict hustlers. And when I read the book, I realized I was not, I was a strategic psychotherapist.
Hmm.
And I was using a lot of the same tricks that he was talking about in the book, that I had been taught by pool sharks rather than psychologists. Uh, but anyway, I wound up with her as an editor, and she played me like a harp and got me to write a good book.
What's the name of
But
your book?
without her, without somebody like that, I'm
Hmm.
a collaborator. I'm not a good initiator. I exercise because I hire this wonderful woman to discipline me and make me do. And as you know, I don't like to teach alone.
Yeah.
I love to teach with somebody else. And I work well with a structure set by somebody else,
Right.
but
So
I'm
if I'm an
not
editor,
good.
Yeah.
And and I finally accepted that and stopped giving it moral meaning and just
Yes.
accepted, okay, this is, I'm good at some things and I'm not good at other things.
Yeah. So, tell me the name of your book, and then let's talk about moral meaning.
Okay, the book is still in print. It was published in 1984. And the name of the book is Families Under the Influence. And it's a book about strategic therapy with alcoholic families. And it's still used in some social work programs
Wow.
because uh, I think it gives a pretty clear idea of thinking in systems
Mm.
and systems theory. And it's it's entertaining. It's easy to read. One of the guys at the pool room heard about it and read it, and he's a Bosnian.
Wow.
And was once, you know, he got out of the war in Bosnia because he was such a good pool player that he played for the national team and he didn't have to go into the army. And
Wow.
he had an alcoholic parent and uh, got himself through the book, even though English isn't his native language. But
Wow.
he's a very ambitious and uh, focused guy. Anyway, so that's the book. And it got me into the famous expert business back in the 80s, which did not bring out the best in me. But,
Mm.
uh,
What do you mean?
well, I didn't have the maturity to be a big shot.
To be an expert.
So it sort of brought out my arrogant asshole parts.
Okay. So you went from being like, I'm this hustler guy to now I'm this expert, and this still was, it just
Yeah, well,
transformed into that.
the facts change and the truth tends to remain the same. So moral meaning is a phrase that I invented. I think I haven't heard it anywhere else, but people find it because I believe, this is my theory for what it's worth, that the most important motivating force for people is the need to feel like a good person, whatever they, I mean, if you're a Nazi, then it's the need to be a good Nazi. And if you're a Hell's Angel, then it's the need to be a good Hell's Angel. Whatever values you ascribe to get information that you're not consistent with those values is unbearably painful because it creates shame. It's, your badness being witnessed.
Mm.
And our systems are designed to avoid that experience at all costs. So when I see couples, for instance, I see a lot of couples because this is a little sidebar, but if you're in a couple, like I know you're in a couple, and so I will say to you that the quality of the space between you and your partner will determine the quality of your life more than any other single factor. Do you agree with that?
Yes, definitely.
Right.
Yeah.
I've never had anybody disagree with that
Yeah.
who's been in a couple. If things are going well there and you lose your job or you have a fire or whatever, you're okay. And
Mm.
if that's going badly and you get an award and you get a big raise, you're still miserable.
Mm.
So what I noticed over a lot of years of doing therapy is that individual therapy is bad for couples because couples fight about one thing. And what they fight about is who's the better person. Who's more generous, who's more loving, who's more hardworking, whatever.
Yeah.
And to the extent they take that struggle seriously, they're going to be miserable.
Mm.
And so if one of them goes into therapy alone, so because their central relationship is the most important determinant of their experience, you're going to be doing couples therapy. You're going to be hearing about the relationship from them. And what you're going to be hearing from them is their innocent victim story,
Mm.
which is a
Yeah.
story that explains to you how their pain is the fault of is due to character flaws in their partner.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so a therapist who's listening to this has essentially two choices, which is challenge the innocent victim story, and then they'll go and find another therapist. or you support the innocent victim story and actively harm your client's well-being.
Wow.
Uh, because there's no case on record of an innocent victim story being of any positive use to anybody. And so what I always will do with a new client who's in a relationship is get their partner in right away.
Okay.
And interview them about their life and not challenge, just get to know them. So one, I have my own impression of them. I'm not getting all the information about them from their partner. And two, have them get to know me and understand that I take the quality of the relationship very seriously and am open to communicating with them. And I invite them to see me as a resource. And about somewhat under half, but close to half the time, that leads us to couples therapy. And
Really? Okay.
the partner becomes a regular, and that means sometimes I see one of them, sometimes I see, but they're an active part of the therapy. And the rest of the time, that's the only time I see them. But when their partner gets off on a thing, I'll say, well, that wasn't exactly consistent with my impression. I say, well, she has this part. And I say, well, but we can talk about it in a way which has the possibility of being more constructive. So what I try to do with couples is take all the fun out of that moral struggle.
Okay.
And I also do what IFS couples therapists do, which is obviously help them heal the parts of themselves that are vulnerable to their partner's judgment. So when they make moral judgments on each other, and I've never seen a moral judgment lead to anything good, by the way, in any case whatsoever. I think basically moral judgment is a design flaw of the human experience. I can see where it comes from, in terms of evolution, and I also follow a spiritual practice that makes it very clear about that. But basically, I try to help them heal the parts that are vulnerable to their partner's judgment. So there aren't receptors for it. Like if I said to you, Tammy, I noticed that you're very selfish when I say that, you notice it hits, even though I'm full of shit, and I'm just using an example, but there's a receptor for that.
Yes.
If I say, Tammy, I think you're a communist.
Yeah.
You notice you respond with compassion and curiosity and say, God, I wonder why you said that. What's wrong with it?
Wow. Right. Because there's no receptor.
20 years ago, there would have been a receptor.
Yeah. Right.
And it would have gotten a protector responding to me. And now, you smile and say, wow, what a weird thing. I want to help the people in the couple respond to, what did you do with my whatever, with compassion and curiosity, as opposed to a protector, because protector parts never protect. What they do is they energize and attract whatever they're trying to protect against. So they all put out the fire with gasoline. So the less they're active in a relationship, the better off everybody is.
Does it seem
That's my belief.
And it rings true for me when I think about my relationship and the things that I can just be like, whatever, he says whatever and doesn't, like he's calling me a communist, like whatever. Then there's certain things like being called selfish, or I'll say this, don't tell anybody, being called a brat. I have a huge reaction to that. Part of me has a huge reaction to that. There's a big receptor to that.
Right.
Don't tell anybody.
But
don't tell him.
The thing is, rather than tell anybody, if you follow the part of you that reacts to brat and find out what part gets activated by that creates shame in that part that gets so angry, and heal that part, then it'll stop hitting a nerve. And when somebody calls you a brat, you'll say, what an odd word to use. What made you think to call me that?
Wow. So, that was my thought too about the moral meaning is that it's it seems to be that I'm wondering, I guess I'm asking, I'm wondering if I make moral meaning about my husband, like I often will be like, my husband's mean or he's a jerk, or he's not nice. I think that's the thing that comes up for me a lot is not nice.
Not kind, right?
Yeah. And so
Whatever.
I'm wondering if that's like a protecting my is there a part of me that is it somehow protecting my shame in some
Sure.
way? Okay.
Look, you're in pain, and it's either because you're bad or because he's bad. So
Okay,
which one are
there it
you going to
is.
pick?
Okay.
You're going to pick the opposite of the one he's going to pick.
Right, right, right. So then it's like, okay, so I'm feeling pain and it's that, right. So it's like, I'm going to blame him. He's the bad.
Right.
I'm not the bad one. He's the
Yeah.
bad one.
Right.
Okay.
He's the bad one,
Yeah.
and his story is you're the bad one,
Yeah.
and to the extent you guys take that seriously and are committed to that, you will be miserable and you'll make each other unhappy, and the space between you will be toxic.
Mm,
And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with either of you.
right. Well,
You
that's what
know,
I'm also hearing you say is that often there's not. Like often in a
always
couple.
there's not.
Okay.
The nice thing about IFS is it has one diagnosis, which is parts that have been forced into an extreme role.
Mm,
And so, also, there's a book that I recommend for people because it's about 100 pages. It's pretty clearly written, and it can really change the way you see, which is Sam Harris's book, Free Will, which basically proves beyond any shadow of a doubt that it doesn't exist.
hmm.
That most of the choices you make are made by parts that are not in your awareness.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
that's scientifically demonstrable. And before it was scientifically demonstrable, it was philosophically demonstrable,
Hmm.
which takes all the fun out of moral judgment and all the fun out of punishment, which has no validity or use.
Well, it's funny that you're saying it that way, but it's so true. Like I don't see couples, but I think of how many individuals that I see that we spend so much time talking about how bad their partners are, and that
Right.
it's like that gets us nowhere, but it seems fun and that it like helps them feel better, maybe in some
Exactly.
way.
Yeah, it's like scratching a mosquito bite.
Yeah.
While you're doing it, there's some sense of relief and
Yeah.
pleasure.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
while you're doing it, it's making it worse, and it is.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's why I don't see individuals who are in a relationship without having some relationship with their partner.
Yeah.
Sometimes I can't get the partner in, and uh, and I really think I'm good at getting them in. In other words, I used to work exclusively with people who, families with a chronic drug addict, alcoholic, whatever. And of course, the user would not present themselves. The people who present themselves are their quote victims.
Yeah.
I was very good. In fact, my book was to some extent about how do you get them in and get them participating actively in healing. And I was good at it, but I'm not consistently successful. I'm about 90% successful at getting a partner in. And I'm working
It's
with
probably
two
pretty good.
people now actively who I have been able to get their partners
Hmm.
in. One of them I finished with, but the other one I'm still working with and probably will for a while.
Does that trigger something in you?
Not anymore. I mean, I have, but one nice thing about being old, your body calls for more and more attention, but
Hmm.
other people's opinions mean less and less to you. And you get more and more forgiving of the fact that you can't do everything well. Because I grew up with what I call an alcoholic belief system. And that's why I became so interested in it. And Cinco, the woman I teach SAD with, calls it the rules of shame. I call it an alcoholic belief system. But it basically says uh, a good person is a person without flaws or limitations.
Hmm.
And if you have that belief system, you're guaranteed to be miserable. And I
Wow.
grew up with it. And it's interesting because there was no drinking in my family. My father might have drunk a bottle of liquor in his whole life.
Wow.
But at one time, he weighed 400 pounds.
Wow.
And my brother, who was the smartest person I've ever been in the presence of for any length of time. I mean, who I knew well, weighed 500 pounds when he died.
Wow.
And I was also sometimes very overweight too, but I mostly got into opiates. That was so I
Drug of
was less.
choice. Yeah. So their
And
drug
that
of
doesn't,
choice was
opiates
food.
do not make you fat. That's one wonderful thing
That's
about
one benefit.
it.
So there's the addict mindset though, right? Was a food addict or so it sounds like there was
Right.
some
You
similarities.
need relief from
Yeah.
shame.
Yeah.
And if you discover something that seems to relieve the pain of shame, you get very attached to
Of
it, whatever it is.
course. Yeah. Yeah.
And I've been addicted. I've had addictive relationships to, I if I were guessing, I'd say 20 plus, uh, whatever you call it, media or whatever
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
lifetime. Like
Mm.
I used to run 7 miles a day, and I got a stress fracture in my foot, and I kept running. I couldn't stop,
Holy cow.
and every step was painful, and I couldn't, but I kept doing it.
Holy cow.
Which, I mean, you know, it was worse than waking up puke drunk every morning or something. But I did it.
Well, tell me the thinking around this list that Anne has and that you have this sort of characteristics of an alcoholic and how that's tied into
Well, it's not,
moral
you see,
meaning.
the reason I use alcoholic is because one of the things that I believe is that it's much more useful to see addiction as a religion rather than a disease. And a religion is a thought system that answers two questions. One is, what is a good person? And the other is, what is our relationship to a higher power, greater context, God, whatever? Thought systems that religion thought systems tend to, and with the word is ism, like Judaism, Catholicism, Mohammedanism, Islam is what, but that's
Yeah.
the word Mohammedanism is what I first heard about it.
Yeah.
Communism, alcoholism,
Mm.
and they all have a teaching about what a good person is and what's our relationship to a higher power.
Mm.
And my understanding of the religion of alcoholism is that a good person is a person without flaws and limitations. So if you talk to an like if somebody says to you, "You mean you take your car to a mechanic?" I feel shame
Yeah. Yeah.
because I can't fix my car.
Yeah.
If somebody says, "Do you speak Urdu?" People respond, "Well, I never had a chance." They take that as an attack because
Yeah.
you've referred to something that other people can do that they can't do, and it hurts.
Makes me a bad person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You have to hide all your flaws and limitations. So you can't, for instance, say, "Oh, my bad. I'm so sorry. I screwed that up." You can't do that. You have
Hmm.
to say, "Well, you," followed
Ah.
by "why ever you're responsible for my mistake." Well, of course, if you have that belief system, you've got all these parts because you have parts that are stupid and deceitful and frightened and cowardly and, whatever. Or at least I do. And I can't allow those parts, or my system can't allow those parts to get into my awareness because that's so painful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what happened? So it means that, first of all, there are all these parts that if they get stimulated, they generate shame. And
Mm.
we have parts that Dick Schwartz calls firefighters. And when parts that are not supposed to be part of us become noticeable to these parts that really need to be good,
Mm.
they experience excruciating pain. And if they find something that seems to mitigate that, they get very attached to it.
Mm.
See,
Yeah, of
so if
course.
you go to AA meetings, you see, what do they do there? Well, the first thing they do is they say we're all bozos on the bus. And if you have coffee at an AA meeting, you know, if you go to a cocktail party, you know, if you meet me, I'll say, well, you know, I'm this big shot and I teach all over the world and blah, blah, and I have a book out and they, you know, and I'm talking about, you know, in AA meetings, they say, I don't know what to do with my daughter. She's, you know, they're, they're learning to make room for their vulnerabilities and their limitations.
Mm.
You know, and they have the fourth and fifth step, which is their version of what we call unburdening, which
Oh,
is
wow.
to list all the things that make you bad and then talk to and share them with another person.
Have
The
my
fourth and
badness
fifth step.
witnessed.
And when
Yeah.
I used to work with,
Mm.
what they call, but it's basically damaged doctors.
Oh,
Because I had
okay.
a friend who was a guy named Michael Palmer, who was so he had been a doctor and he had prescribed to himself and lost his license and then rehabbed and became, you know, a resource to other doctors like that. And I could have filled my entire practice with impaired physicians. That's the term.
Okay. Okay.
It came back to my old mind, and a lot of them had gone to A meetings, and they never put together more than 2 or 3 months of sobriety. And I'd always say, "Have you done a fourth and fifth step?" And they said, "Well, sort of."
Yeah,
They
that's where
had,
people get stuck, right? They get stuck and they drop
yeah.
out or they relapse
Well,
in fourth and
it's
fifth
too
step.
painful for them to think about it, and they never did.
Yeah.
And so they never had a chance to. And of course, doctors have to be perfect.
Yeah.
And they grew up, you know, they're the best student and the best thing, and they get into the best thing, and they get all A's and blah blah blah. And then they're told in medical school they're essentially a different species from their patients. You know,
Mm.
I taught in a medical school, which was actually better at that than many, but
Mm.
still they got that message. And they have enormous access to drugs,
Mm.
and so that's why they have about the same probably addiction rate that jazz musicians have. I was a jazz musician, by the way.
Were you? Okay. So
That's
do you think there's that reason is because there's no room for me to be bad. I have to
yeah,
be perfect and
right. You got
good.
to be, yeah. Uh, so these poor bastards, you know, they're sitting ducks. I mean,
Mm.
and you know, they are the difference, you know, between life and death for people very often.
Yeah.
And they're supposed to be bigger than life, and they're not.
Yeah.
You know, they're guys who have had a very good memory and are capable of working very hard. Some of them are smart. Most of them
Mm.
aren't that smart, in my experience. They have good memories and they're very diligent.
Wow.
And but they're supposed to be smarter than everybody.
Yeah. So it's a lot
And
of
if they
pressure.
find anybody who's smarter than them, it generates shame, and they need to relieve that shame.
Right. And they have access to all these drugs. So
Yeah,
what
but
about
most of them just drink.
what about I'm going to back you up about this idea of physical pain. So thinking of
Yeah.
the doctors made me think about physical pain. So what would you recommend if someone has back pain and are interested in trying to figure out the shame connection to their back
Well,
pain?
one thing I would recommend is to read one of John Sarno's books and get a sense of, because then that idea uh, gets some validity in their mind. Because the thing is, you give moral meaning. You mean I'm doing this myself?
Yeah, okay.
You know,
Yeah.
uh, it's like the Symingtons would try to treat cancer with psychology, and the problem with it is it gave moral meaning to cancer. So if you
Mm.
didn't get better, that meant you were bad.
Mm.
Right? You see, and that it's a very tricky idea for a lot of people, and it made their work much less useful.
Right. So I think that's what you're
So,
saying is for people even considering that to get more information
yeah,
so that they're not feeling like, oh, it's my fault I'm doing this, or oh, it's all in my
and
head.
then get an IFS therapist.
Yeah.
And the thing is, right now I'm treating 4 people for migraines,
Wow.
and my I can usually stop migraine headaches, help people stop migraine headaches in less than 10 sessions.
That's incredible.
Uh, you just get people talking to the firefighter that generates the headaches. And when I started, uh, I was sort of new to IFS, and one of my best friends, who is a journalist, a brilliant, eccentric, wonderful woman, uh, a part of the couple that introduced my wife and I, had migraines every day, and she was crippled by them. And she'd have a little window where she could write, and then the rest of the time she's in a dark room where she'd write in a dark.
Gosh.
And so I tried getting her in touch with it because I used to use hypnosis with migraines and had pretty good success.
Hmm.
And she met the part that generated it and healed the exile that it was responding to. And then she'd get about 4 migraines a week rather than 7. And then we addressed that one. Over the years, it's been over 20 years now, she's had 18 different migraines. She doesn't have them now, but at any day I could get a call from her saying I'm getting one, and we'll do it on the phone in 10 minutes.
Wow.
I mean,
That's
I would say the last 6 or 7, that's what happened. She'd call
that's
me up
amazing.
and say, I'm
Wow.
getting a headache. And because once a firefighter's strategy gets into the system, it gets imitated. Like, when I work with addicts, usually people have 5 or 6 drinkers. And
Wow.
there's a drinker who has to drink every day. And then if you heal that one, then they have to drink 5, 6 times. And then, and you just work your way down the hierarchy until people feel safe.
Wow. Well, that makes sense though, right? So if I have an exile that a firefighter has learned that food, which I talk about often on here, is
Yeah.
that food is a great strategy to help me with shame, then that makes a ton of sense that it's like, oh wow, we found something to help. Why wouldn't that get imitated in my system?
Yeah.
That actually just
Except,
makes
of
sense.
course, because irony is a driving force of the universe, the food, your use of food generates more shame, which generates more need, which generates more shame. So
Yeah.
you have the vicious cycle, the
Yeah.
descending spiral.
Well, all right, so
Because
it's shame on both sides. It's like bookends of shame.
yeah, and
What were you
so
gonna say?
you get drunk, you wake up in the morning, and you feel like shit warmed over, and and then these parts shame you,
Yeah.
and you vow you'll never take another drink, and that lasts till about 4 o'clock in the afternoon,
Yeah.
when the parts that have been shamed are in excruciating pain and need relief.
Hmm.
And then you get drunk again, and
Right.
then you shame it. So when you're working with addicts, the first thing you really need to do is work with the shaming parts,
Hmm.
and see if you can get an agreement for them to declare a moratorium.
Okay.
And that's difficult for them because very often they're addicted to shaming. I mean,
Yeah.
very often. So you have to work through that whole business, which is
So,
why, dealing with addiction is not an easy or simple business, in case
yeah.
anybody thought it was.
Yeah. In case anyone thought it was simple. So that reminds me, and this might not be related. So then the sort of addiction to shame reminds me of something that has really changed the way I've worked with a couple people is your ideas of hope and despair. And is sort of
uh,
addicted to despair. I mean, I don't know how if you would say
right.
it that way, but I'm curious if you could
Yeah,
talk
no,
about
that's
that.
that's what. Well, the thing about, you see, despair is every. I'm not sure everybody, but I haven't run into anybody who doesn't have parts that see despair as a resource and see hope as a threat. And you can understand how that happens because there's a dynamic which is you're in pain, you try to fix it, and it doesn't work. And you try again, it doesn't work. You try again, it doesn't work. And at some point, some part of you gets it that when you try and fail to the pain you're already feeling, you add the pain of disappointment and the shame of failure, because we live in a culture which gives moral meaning to failure.
Yeah.
Doesn't see failure as a necessary part of every project. If you fail, you're a failure existentially, right?
Yeah.
Which is shame. Shame is existential. I'm a failure. So you get there, you understand that. You may not be able to deal with the original pain, but you can be effective at changing the disappointment and the shame of failure by giving up.
Right.
And stop trying. And when you do that, there's relief. So your shame gets relief. And as I said, when you find something that relieves shame, you get very attached to it. So that this part that's made this discovery becomes addicted to despair, essentially. Which, if you're a therapist who's trying to generate change, generate shame. That's darn that old Sigmund Freud anyway. Anyway, you're trying to generate change. These parts are like sand in the gears. They're actively opposing what you're doing.
Yeah.
So you have to form a relationship with them and essentially get them to chill.
Yeah.
And so I developed this way of talking to them, which essentially explains to them what I explained to you. And because you're working with IFS, you can offer those parts the chance to unburden themselves from this belief that despair is a resource and that hope is a threat. And
it's so hard though. I think thinking of the addict and the like, I wake up hungover and then I'm not gonna drink. Thinking of that, it's like it just feels so much better to not try. I mean, even if it's with food or cigarettes, or even with like not making my husband the bad guy. Like even that is sort of like parts of me are like kind of addicted to that. He's the bad guy, I'm the good guy.
It alters your experience of shame.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what basically therapy is a way of essentially bleeding shame out of the system.
Okay.
Shame and fear out of the system. Because, burdens are the meaning that a part's given its experience and the feelings and beliefs that follow that. But I think it's the moral meaning that a part gives its experience. And and self-energy essentially gives you a resource to reduce the amount of that in the system. So
yeah, it's so funny because I actually kind of like forgot about self as a resource. I'm like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? This sounds like a lot of hard work. Oh yeah, we had self.
Well, that's
I forgot.
why the minute I saw Dick work and saw what he was doing, I essentially stopped doing hypnosis and started doing IFS.
Okay, so tell me when that was. When did that happen?
June of 1995.
Okay, and so
I'd known Dick for over 10 years before
how did you know him?
What he was up to.
Yeah.
We were just friends. We played basketball and shot the shit and talked about cases. I thought basically what he was doing was a different way of explaining hypnosis.
Okay.
Even though he'd never been, he'd never been trained in hypnosis.
Okay. But that's what you were doing hypnosis. That's what you.
Yeah, that's what I was. That's what I was using as my primary modality at the time.
Okay. So you knew Dick, and you were like, okay, he's just doing the same thing, and then you saw him work at something.
It got to be a joke because we used to present at the big national meetings. We were both, on the circuit, as we call it, the famous expert business. Because then he was co-author of the standard family therapy text. He hadn't invented IFS yet.
Okay.
When I knew him. And it got to be a joke that we never got to see each other present.
Right. Because
We
you're
were
too busy
always
being your
scheduled opposite
experts.
each other.
Yeah.
And we had a friend, we both were friends of the guy who ran the networker conference down in DC. And we said, could you schedule so we can see each other? And he said, sure. He never did it. You know, it didn't slip his mind. It was this. He didn't actually make the schedule. It was, you know,
Okay.
and it never got. So I didn't see him until '95 at an AFTA meeting in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And he, you know, the minute I saw him do a demo, I got it that he was into something so much far beyond what I was doing or anybody else I knew was doing.
Wow.
Basically, I stopped doing what I was doing that day and started doing IFS. I've
Wow.
been a fanatic ever since. Well, you know I'm a fanatic. You just didn't know how long I've been a fanatic.
Well, clearly, I mean, clearly you're a fanatic because you have so much passion about it. You've had such a huge impact on so many people.
Well, I'd like to think, and I'd like to think the impact is positive for most of them, but I've also, you know, done my share of damage. However, uh,
Mm,
you know, I have parts that understand that damage doesn't really happen because
mm,
what the way I got into IFS was because I used to be a very angry, violent, unhappy being.
mm.
And through my wife of the time, who I'm still very fond of, I discovered something called A Course in Miracles. And I discovered it because I saw when she had done it, she started doing it, but she was into, you know, tarot and what I used to call creepy studies. And she started doing a course, but I realized after about a year and a half, that she had changed and that
Wow.
she had become much less angry and much less reactive and whatnot. I said, you know, you really have smoothed out your whole thing. What's happening? She said, it's the course. And
Mm,
because by that time I was very interested in anything that could really heal,
mm.
I decided to look into it. And it's a very difficult, obscure, uh, but it's what I needed at the time. And I spent a lot of time with it. I was
Well,
in a
and I remember you told me that you were connected to, again, the like, not the developer, but somehow you were connected to
Well,
one
no,
of the
the
big
guy
guys or
who edited
something,
it was a
right?
guy named Ken Wapnick, and he had a PhD in psychology, and he uh, ran a seminar for therapists who use the Course in Miracles who
Oh,
practice. I
wow.
was in that
Okay.
seminar for 11 years,
Wow.
uh, and the course has, you know, it uses religious terms in very different ways because it's trying to deconstruct your religious ideas.
Yeah.
You know, even if you think you don't have them, which I thought I didn't.
Yeah.
And it has a term called the Holy Spirit. And the course definition of the Holy Spirit is that memory of God's love in your mind, which, when asked, will correct the errors of ego.
Wow.
And
Mm.
when I saw Dick work, I realized he had found a way to mobilize and manifest Holy Spirit in people without going through all the crap I went through. He
Wow.
could just get people's parts to step back, and it exposed who we really are.
Mm.
And
Mm.
also, you know, when you contrast IFS idea of who we really are with, say, the psychoanalytic view of who we really are, which is we're a thin veneer of civilization over this bubbling cauldron of, you know, primitive, vicious, you know, needs and drives. And it's a much more sanguine view.
Mm. Yeah.
And, but also, it essentially allows people to use their spiritual resources toward healing without getting into religion or metaphysics. So you
Yeah.
can do it with aggressive atheists and you can do it with fundamentalists, although it's tricky with both, obviously.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think
but
that's one thing that I feel like I really like about it. It feels like IFS is really respectful of what, like, it doesn't take away my faith. It feels like it has added to my faith. Like I haven't had to like shelf my faith
yeah, you're
in.
right. It doesn't get into those kind of fights with people. You can avoid them.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
And
But it
because,
enhance my relationship with God. I feel like it's sort of this. I feel more
yeah,
connected to
yeah.
God, and I think that's true for whatever people think, whatever their spiritual path is. It feels like IFS has
Well,
opened
the
that up
thing
for
is, it
them.
does, if you use IFS, it will deepen your spiritual experience, whatever, however you
Whatever
define
that
it.
is.
However you
Yeah.
define it.
Mike, why were you such a mean guy?
Well, I grew up with mean people. My grandfather was a gangster. My
Oh,
father, until he died, my father ran his straight business.
he wasn't
Uh,
part of the gangster. He wasn't a
well,
gangster.
who knows? I mean,
Mm,
his profession, he professed that he ran this hardware business and didn't know, but
mm.
that isn't a very credible position. And he was like, uh, he was 6'6", and when he was in shape, he weighed over 250 pounds. He was a judo champion and he was a bully.
Hmm.
Uh, and so I was a bully.
Was it just you and your brother?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was big and I was athletically talented. And when I was young, I was very, very much taller than other people. So I would get bullied by people who were 4 years older than me, but shorter.
Got it. Got
And
it.
also, I was very socially unskillful. And so I was a target in other ways. So I got bullied until I learned how to fight, and then I became a bully.
Hmm.
And it took me a long while to get over it. Also, I had sort of a witty, you know, and I would use that sadistically. Uh,
You
and
are really witty. That's why there's all the Mike-isms, because you're so witty.
yeah,
Right. But so you
but
use that in a, yeah.
I would use that in a not so nice way.
Yeah.
And I still have to watch it because I have a part that is generating one-liners constantly. And uh, in the old days, more of them used to come out of my mouth than now. Now I'm sort of, I have an editor part that says, yeah, because these things just, there's a little background where they're feeding me these lines.
Yeah.
So uh, I use that part. The one-liner part is fairly active when I'm teaching,
Mm.
and some, most people like it, and some people don't.
I think if they can get like a dry sense of humor, if people can't get like sarcasm, like some people either don't get sarcasm or it hurts them, or I think it's because
Well,
it's so dry and,
sarcasm is always inappropriate. I think.
oh,
I don't
okay.
think it's ever constructive,
Oh,
because basically it's shaming,
oh,
and so I really try to avoid sarcasm.
okay.
I sometimes will use sort of self-depreciating sarcasm, and even that is, it's a dangerous tool to be around. It's like
Mm.
chainsaws. They can be really useful, but you got to be really careful with them.
Do we have time to talk about your panic protocol?
Oh, you mean the phobia protocol?
Yeah, phobia. That's
Yeah.
it.
Well, the thing
Yeah.
is, that's available, and anybody who emails me, I will send it to them. Because it turns out that phobic responses, which are ubiquitous and can distort your life a lot, are very easily treatable because they're all based on shame of a part that it has shame about its feelings.
Mm.
And the phobia is a firefighter that its way of generating relief is to essentially flood you with shame to the
Mm.
extent that you will do anything to stay away from whatever triggers
Hmm.
it. In fact, a lot of people don't know they're phobic because they've gotten so good at avoiding what triggers them.
Right.
But this is an important statement. I'm going to make it. Almost all panic attacks are phobic reactions to something that they're unaware is the trigger. So they're just going along, and all of a sudden you're flooded with this horrible feeling, like your life is in immediate danger, and you don't know what generates it, and you can cure most phobias in a half hour.
Wow. Wow.
And if even a therapist that's not experienced in using the protocol, because I've given it that you haven't probably, uh,
Yeah,
and you can sit
I do
there
have
with
it.
it's 3/4 of a page,
Yeah.
and you can say, "This friend of mine uh, generated this process that he says can cure phobias. You want to try it?" And you
Mm,
go through it, and about 75% of the time you'll be successful.
wow.
And if you're not successful, try it again, because if you do it a few times, you'll get good at it, and then your percentage will go way up.
Yeah.
And the thing you get better and better at is figuring out whatever feeling the child in the memory has that they're ashamed of.
Yeah.
And the more you do it, the better you'll get at it.
Yeah, that was the thing that I thought was striking is that you asked, I saw a demo and you asked, she was talking about a phobia she had. And um, I think you asked a really pointed question about the first time you had that feeling or something like that. And she was immediately, and didn't even know, she immediately gave you a memory and she didn't even know that that was connected to the phobia. Like she didn't have an intellectual understanding.
Well, the thing is, our memories are filed by affect. So if you think about, you just, if you think about something you're phobic to, immediately that feeling's there.
Hmm.
And it doesn't have to, it may not be there full flight, but you get that. And if you focus on that feeling and get a memory, you see, I I do something to dissociate that part because it's too painful.
Yeah.
But every memory will be associated but with that. And any of the memories you work with will work.
Yeah, that's great. Right. So you don't have to have the specific one. I mean, just like with working with an exile or right? I mean,
Yeah.
same idea.
Except
Um,
it's not
Go ahead.
IFS.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
hypnosis with IFS. But you don't need hypnotic skill set to do it successfully.
Yeah.
You don't need to know how to do hypnosis to do this protocol effectively.
So what is that? Can you tell me what that means? That it's hypnosis, it's not
Well, in
IFS,
other
it's
words, you see, with IFS, it's an open-ended process, and I'm following whatever
yeah.
the parts are doing.
Yeah.
And the phobia protocol, I'm telling the parts what to do.
Yes, you're very
It's
directive.
very directive,
Yeah.
and it's very focused. And if interesting sidelines appear, I ignore them, and I just go for, because I'm trying to get a very definite response, which is to get that firefighter to stop doing what it's doing.
Yeah.
And I know the way to get it done is the same way you get any firefighter to calm down, which is heal the part that's triggering it.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it's essentially cognitive. You tell the part, there's no reason to be ashamed of that feeling. And here's
Mm.
why. And when
Mm.
it believes you, it's over.
That's amazing. Yeah, you did more teaching. Like once you had the part up, you did a little teaching
Yeah.
and yeah.
I did it indirectly,
Yeah.
with some hypnotic tricks, but you don't need to. It's just that I learned these things so long that I use them. But you
Yeah.
don't need to do it the way I do it. And uh, I actually learned this thing. I didn't invent it. I learned it from Richard Bandler like 30 something years ago.
Wow,
Uh,
okay.
and he did it with NLP, neuro linguistic programming, was the thing he sold and invented.
Okay.
Uh, and it worked. I saw it. It worked.
Hmm.
So I went and did it. And it was interesting because I learned it with this friend of mine who was my best friend at the time. Over 30 years later, I was doing a workshop on healing phobia at the IFS conference. And who showed up but the friend that was sitting next to me when I learned this from Bandler. And he
Wow.
had gotten interested in IFS, and we had a reunion
That's
and
awesome.
have sort of, rekindled our relationship after we hadn't seen each other for about 10 years.
That's
So
so neat.
we're back in touch intermittently. He lives in New Orleans now, so I don't see much of him. But
I always end with if you weren't doing what you're doing now, what like if you didn't have to do therapy and the trainings and all the stuff that you would do, what would you be doing instead?
I don't have a clear idea of that. I'm lucky enough uh, to be paid for something I do for free if I wasn't getting paid.
Yeah.
And I'm 77 now, so most people my age aren't working anymore, and I'm working because it's more fun than anything else I could do.
Hmm.
And what do I do in my spare time? I play billiards, and I go to plays, and I eat in restaurants. And uh, I play plenty of billiards already. As a matter of fact, I'm uh, determined to get much more interested in Rotary because I think Rotary, in fact, has the resources to constructively address the opiate crisis, which I don't think any other institution in the U.S. has the resources to do that. And there's a way in Iceland, they found a way to reduce teen drug use by 75%. And so what I'm trying to do, I have the idea of doing is trying to mobilize Rotary to institute the Icelandic uh, model throughout the country.
Wow.
And I'm lazy, and I'd rather play billiards. So I'm trying to get enough allies and whatnot.
You have great ideas, so you just have to like tag someone to
Yeah, well,
make them work.
ideas are cheap, and what there are a lot of diligent people in Rotary, but Rotary has it's in every town in
Mm.
the U.S. and in most towns throughout the world,
Mm.
and it usually their members are people who are community minded and mostly small business people, and so there are a lot of skillful people like the superintendent of schools is in the Rotary, and the police chief is in the Rotary, and the town
Right.
manager is in the. So you've got
Right.
resources in every town, and the Icelandic model is really simple. They don't tell kids that drugs are bad or dangerous. What they do is they identify kids that are at risk, and they make available to them in a very aggressive way skills that are fun, things that to do that are fun and constructive, because kids that have something interesting to do and they care about don't have time or energy to get involved in drugs. They might smoke a reefer in the weekend. They have too much to do to sit around getting stoned all the time.
Wow.
I mean, it's that simple,
Mm.
and it's a huge difference between simple and easy.
Mm. Yes.
Basketball is a simple game. You throw the ball in the ring and you stop the other guy from throwing the ball in the ring.
Well, I've heard you say that about IFS. Like IFS is really
It's
simple.
very simple. It's not so easy,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's worth learning if you know, are interested essentially in generating better relationships,
Mm.
because you don't need to be a therapist for IFS to be a very useful
Yeah.
way to see things. Because
Definitely.
it's not a technique, it's a paradigm. It's a way of understanding the mind.
Yeah.
And
I love that.
it creates a lot of options.
I know I just joined this new podcasting Facebook page, and you can put a plug for what you're doing, and I said, it's a model of psychotherapy, blah blah blah. And I thought, I don't really want to call it that anymore. I mean, that's what it is, but it is not just that. It's becoming, or it is so much different than that. And I don't think that's a good description anymore.
It's a paradigm for understanding the mind.
Hmm. I love
And
that.
and and just seeing the mind that way creates so many options that you don't have if you don't see the mind that way.
Yeah.
So I was talking to somebody, and she says, I think my dad's okay, but my mom's a bad person. And I said, that's not a useful way to think, because the minute you think that way, there's no way of relating constructively to that person.
Hmm.
And if you think my mom has parts that have been forced into an extreme role, and they can't help doing what they're doing, and she also has parts that are open-hearted and curious and compassionate.
Hmm.
It gives you options you don't have if you think my mom's a bad person,
Yeah. Yeah.
because there aren't
That's
any bad people. There are people who do horrible things. And unfortunately, those people have responsibility to set national policy and right now. But they're not bad people. They're people whose parts have been forced into an extreme role. And they're not bad because they want to be bad. They're bad because they can't see things any other way because these parts have so much energy and so I think they're protecting us.
Well, and like you said, and they're working to deal with the shame, the parts that have the strategy, and that's to help them with the shame.
Right. And they have a thought system where they can't be wrong. And it
protects them from shame.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Mike, thank you so much. I really appreciate you doing this with me.
It is my pleasure, Tammy. And so I'll see you this summer when you show up.
Definitely. I'm going to show up.
And
I'm coming.
As a parking lot.
I would love that.
Okay, darling.
Thanks for hanging out today. If you liked this episode, make sure you subscribe. And if you really like this episode, share it with a friend and leave a review. You can follow me on Instagram at IFS Tammy and join our community on Facebook at the One Inside Podcast. Talk to you next time.
Today's episode was sponsored by Brighter Vision. What's the point of having a beautiful website if it doesn't attract the clients you want to see? As the worldwide leaders of website design for therapists, Brighter Vision sees this issue happen way too often. A nice-looking website doesn't equate to a successful website. The truth is, your current website might even be turning off potential clients. That's where Brighter Vision comes in. Brighter Vision's team of website designers will create a website that is centered around attracting and retaining your ideal client so that you can have a nice-looking website as well as a successful one. Better yet, Brighter Vision is offering $100 off exclusively for listeners of the One Inside podcast. To take advantage of this offer, simply go to brightervision.com/inside. Again, that's brightervision.com/inside.